This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber.
Interest on mobile phones should be switched off.
Well, this is the meter.
Okay, and apologies. We have two, one from Barry McAduff and then also from Colin Eastwood. Any other apologies, members, you're aware of? No?
Nope.
Okay, minutes is on page 5. Members, are you content to agree the minutes?
Read.
Okay, thank you. Then, members, we're straight into items 3 and 4 together, looking at the SL1, the taxi meters and taxi fares regulation. And you have a briefing papers there from pages 10 to 15. And then another one is the SL1, the taxi accessibility regulations, NI, and they are at pages 17 to 76, members. The next two items are briefings from officials on SL1 for the taxi meters and fares regulation 2015. There are all the pages there, sorry, members. So you find in your packs a memo from the committee office on each of the regulations, the SL1's briefing papers from Disability Action and IMTAC considered at last week's meeting, supplementary evidence from IMTAC following last week's briefing on page 30, and the ITP report on the impact of proposed vehicle specifications, and email has also been tabled from a taxi driver regarding his concerns about the impact that the taxi regulations will have. This is at page 3 of tabled papers, and members may wish to discuss all these issues. That one also included? Is that
no, it hasn't been, so you might want to refer to it.
So, okay, and I just received an email first thing this morning, again on taxi meters. So it's being passed round to members to be included in your pack. And welcome Ian Greenway, Michael O'Neill, and also Alan. And thank you very much for coming. We certainly have heard quite a bit from IMTAC and from Disabilities Action, and as I said, a number of emails from the industry. So all these issues we certainly would want to raise with you. We have sent them the Disability Action and all the papers. Maybe we'll just go through what they have set out in our last meeting. Let me see.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify? The agenda shows taxi meters being done first and wheelchair accessible vehicles second. I'm open to whichever order we do them in, just so.
I think well, shall we just get on with the taxi meters? Yeah.
I'm happy with whichever way you want to proceed.
Sure. I mean, we'll just get on to
on the taxi meters, but and appreciate. I'm very happy to hear from Ian on that. Just to stay concerned, obviously we've got today. I think it was late last night, stroke this morning. Then, to be fair, in terms of the email, we got one last week. I think from somebody involved with the installation side of it. I suppose, to be fair, this is the email we've got in terms of concerns over this is the coming from Jackie Mahood from the Belfast Taxi Association, which represents, according to that, 750. You know, it's not just an individual driving that, but I see as part of that they've also raised some concerns on that. And I suppose particularly they're requesting a meeting with DOE officials. Now, it may well be that once that meeting takes place, that may be able to clear up those concerns. I'm just a little bit cautious in terms of, I'm very keen to hear, I don't think we should be doing anything to block anything as regards to the SL1's side of it on that bit. However, I'm not sure, given sort of this evidence, whether or not we can bring all this entirely to a conclusion on the meters today. We may need to get things from the Taxi Association in that regard, and then, you know, at least that in consideration. But I'm not in any way sort of demurring from any evidence we're about to get in terms of that on that side of it. But I'm just cautious that there may be some problems just in case. I don't want to be obstructive.
Is that letter likely to be passed to the department for comment?
We can give you a copy.
That's where I was going, but in a rather roundabout way on the
I think
meeting.
it's been circulated, so I get this for one.
But the letter sent to us last week was also sent to you, or was it? Yeah.
No,
That's
that one
about.
wasn't.
Okay.
The issues were raised, they were summarised in a Dallow email.
Okay. Okay. So you are aware of the issues. I mean, mostly the one we received last week was about the underestimate of the costs involved in fitting the taximeters. Okay, and another issue they said is that if every meter has the same tariff structure on it, then you can only, if you have a uniform tariff structure, then can you test, they said, can you test those meters? So, I mean, I'll read that sentence to you. If every meter has the same tariff structure on it, so a uniform test can be conducted. Okay, and so, and it's also then talking about then if you leave taxis to fit, to go to wherever, whoever it is, could be cowboy fitters, to put in the taxi meters, then, you know, it could be open to abuse. And they suggested only factory-appointed dealers should be fitting those correctly. Okay, today's email that I received and some members received, and you have that tabled, and that's about the taxi meter test centres. They are saying that they have not been consulted, that now there is not going to be centres to test it. This is now going to be done within DOE, but certainly you have responded to us previously, because I think the Taxi Act now hasn't provided the power to set up separate test centres, meter testing centres. They also mentioned in today's email about this MID certificate. So that's an issue, a question mark on that being acceptable. And then they also then concerned about hearing phoner cap, I think it was yesterday, saying that the single tier is going to start in September, and they said they have not been told.
Well, on that point, Chair, you'll be aware, and the committee's seen a copy of a letter that went to all taxi drivers and operators a few weeks ago, and a press release. So we have not been behind the table in attempting to inform the taxi industry of what is a complex and reasonably fast-moving process. We do accept. A number of those points are in my proposed brief opening statement, and maybe we can pick up the others at that point if that would be acceptable to the committee.
Yeah. Please proceed.
So thank you for the opportunity to brief you on the taxi meters and maximum fare regulations and address any issues you may have. The Taxis Act 2008, amongst other things, introduced powers allowing the Department to require, for the first time, a mandatory maximum taxi fare tariff across Northern Ireland. The Act also provided powers to introduce the mandatory fitment of taxi meters and printers. These measures were brought forward to provide consumer protection for users of taxis, but they will also protect drivers and operators against any erroneous allegations of overcharging. Discussions on the radio yesterday on surge pricing at busy times by a potential new entrant to the taxi market here, to me, reinforced the need to implement the important protections in these regulations at an early date. In terms of fares, taking the two elements in turn, fares and then taxi meters, you'll recall from previous briefings, but a while ago now, that we commissioned a review of taxi fares to ascertain whether or not a statutory maximum fare would be appropriate for the local taxi industry, and if so, to determine the level of that fare. The Act enabled, didn't require, as primary legislation generally does. The review found the uniform fare would be appropriate throughout Northern Ireland and recommended the three-tariff model outlined in the SO1. There was a consultation when 3,600 people replied, largely supportive of the proposals, but some concerns expressed by a number of consultees around the proposal to introduce an unsocial hours premium. The department did further work on that, looked at the premium loading times, the availability of taxis, and found a number of time bands when demand outstripped supply of taxis, 2 of them during the unsociable hours between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday evenings, and between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. on those same evenings. So, having considered that detailed information further, we're content that the proposed unsocial hours premium is necessary and covers the appropriate period. It's also important to note that the regulated fares are maximum fares and not mandated, so operators are free to charge below the maximum fare should they wish. The fare calculated in 2011 was broadly in line with the current regulated fare for Belfast public hire vehicles. The calculation is being reviewed at present to take account of the passage of time, and the outcome will be provided to the committee in due course, although early indications from the review are suggesting little change. Key elements to that, for instance, are the price of diesel, which has increased and then decreased again. On testing and sealing, as you mentioned, Chair, it had been the Department's intention to set up a network of approved taximeter centres, ATMCs, who would be responsible for the testing, calibration and sealing of taximeters, with DVA monitoring and regulating the regime. Legal advice, however, is that there are insufficient powers in the Taxis Act to pursue this delivery model. As a result, we have considered in-house delivery models within the powers that the Act provides. The new delivery model will continue to see private sector installers being responsible for the calibration and fitment of taximeters and printers, but DVA will be responsible for their approval, testing and sealing. In the longer term, we may consider amendment of the Act to allow ATMCs, dependent on lessons learned during the implementation of the first delivery model. The new model will deliver cost savings for the industry. In the original delivery model, it was anticipated every driver would pay in the region of £50 per year for the calibration and test of their meter. In the revised model, we propose a fee of approximately £35 will be paid for the taximeter test, and this will be paid in year 1 and only on subsequent occasions when a meter is replaced, the fare changed or the seal broken, rather than every year. Upon successful passing of the taximeter test, the meter will be sealed in the taxi and a plaque attached to the taxi. This will be checked during the annual taxi vehicle test and may be inspected by enforcement officers in roadside encounters. There will be, in most meters, a range of fares. One of those will be the maximum fare. There will be a range of other fares. Many taxi operators have different fares for different contracts or off-the-street customers, for instance. So there will be a range. So there will be each taximeter, or certainly each operator's taximeter, will have a different mix of fares within it. So a single uniform testing would probably not apply. So I know a number of operators, for instance, who have different contracts they've won through tender with different organisations with different fare bands in them. So they will have a range of fares within their meter. The test will determine that none of those fares exceeds the maximum fare. That is what the test will determine. We intend that from the 28th of September 2015, all Class A and B taxis, largely the current private and public hire fleets in Northern Ireland, will be required to use an approved taximeter and printer which adheres to the new maximum fare. It will be an offence to use a taxi for hire and reward without such a taximeter and printer after that date. From 30th of October this year, so a month later, if a Class A or B taxi prevents for a taxi test, it will fail if it does not have a sealed meter or printer. It will be an offence to operate without seals as of 29th of January next year. This means that all taxis will be required to present for a taximeter test between September this year and January next year. So there's a phasing in, whilst recognising the annual cycle of taxis would normally have taken us through to next August. We're looking to foreshorten that. Only taximeters that meet the Measurements Instruments Directive, this comes to another point you raised, may be used after the 30th of October next year. Until that date, the Department will continue to accept meters that are on the current London Public Carriage Office list, so long as the meter can connect to a printer and produce a printed receipt at the end of the journey. The Taxis Act defines a taximeter as complying with the Measurement Instruments Directive, so that has been an agreed policy for at least 9 years. the issue raised by Mr Mahood in his email is around whether one particular taxi meter device complies with the Measurement Instruments Directive and provides sufficient security of how the fares are altered. Without going into immense detail, it's an electronic system, so therefore putting an analogue seal on the meter needs to be done in a digital environment. So the fares cannot be altered digitally rather than the old turning of dials in an analogue instrument. And that's the issue we are having ongoing discussions with the manufacturer about. We've had a number of meetings with Mr Mahood exploring that issue. The implementation timetable is very challenging, both on policy and legislation and on operational preparation. Early confirmation of the legislative regime will allow us to undertake the necessary preparation and the necessary communication with the industry. Back to your point, we have deliberately, given our issues with taxi legislation through the Assembly in recent months, we had taken a conscious decision not to communicate detail of any of the regimes with the industry until the committee had cleared the SO1, had cleared the policy intent. So for that reason, we have not gone and talked about the change to ATMCs, etc., until we had come through the proper Assembly processes. Time remains of the essence if we are going to achieve this already delayed timetable. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. Steve, then, if I just ask you specifically about the cost of fitting the meters and the receipt printers, I mean, according to the Taxi Association, that it is grossly underestimated. I think you estimated about £200.
The estimate is 200 for a metre and 220 for a printer.
Oh, 220 for
Do you want to speak to how we reached those figures, Michael?
Yeah, I think it was end of 2011, start of 2012. There was just a survey done of the prices of meters, and obviously there's a range depending what kind of functionality you'll have in your meter. But at the low end, the low price end, the meters start at 220 with the printers at 200. And obviously depending on what you want to do, what you want your meter to be able to do, you can that fee can be higher than that. But the 420 is the figure we've been using to estimate what the cost of the actual devices would cost for the taxi drivers. That's assuming, of course, that taxi drivers don't already have a MID-compliant meter or a meter that's on the PCO list. The PCO list will obviously apply until October 2016, but thereafter it'll be required to have a MID-compliant meter.
Okay, and that's the current price. That's not back in 2011 or whatever. That's the current price.
We haven't revised that estimate, but it's something we could do. We wouldn't expect a large change in that, but it's something we could do. But we wouldn't expect a large change in that estimate. Okay.
I mean, would you say that they must go to factory appointed factories or appointed centres to have them done? No.
I mean, what we're trying to achieve at the end of the day is a safe, fair and fit-for-purpose taxi industry. In this regard, we want safe taxis, so we don't want electrical wires being shoved in, but we also want meters that are secure and consumers and indeed operators can have confidence that they will show the fare they should be showing and that the passengers should be charged the right amount. In terms of who fits meters, I don't think it would be appropriate for us to try and regulate that firm A can fit meters and firm B can't, and indeed we don't have the legislative powers in the Act to require that. But anybody who fits any equipment must comply with safety legislation, must comply with a range of occupational legislation. Taxi firms could choose to fit them themselves, subject to people with the relevant skills. Many people will go, I am sure, to companies who are licensed by meter manufacturers to fit particular brands or particular makes of meters. And that already applies in this non-mandatory metering regime. There are a number of firms in Belfast and in Derry, Londonderry in particular, who do this work and who are licensed agents for a small number. There are only a small number of taxi meter manufacturers, most of them in mainland Europe. But there are they have small numbers of agents in Northern Ireland selling and fitting and servicing and maintaining their meters.
And in the new delivery model, all those meters will come through the department before they go onto the market, before they're in a taxi that can be used for hire and reward. So in the new model, the department will test what's the electronic program, what's inside the meter, and how the meter is attached to the vehicle itself.
So there will be an approved list of meters, manufacturer A, model 1234, model 1235, but potentially not model 1236 because it doesn't meet the requirements of MID and so on.
Okay.
So that will be a published list and obviously maintained as new meters come onto the market and meters go off the market. So both operators and fitters can know which meters can or can't be used.
Okay. What about this criticism that only if you have the same tariff structure can you do the testing properly? Is that a correct
No, that
criticism?
in essence, what we're doing through the test, or what DVA will be doing through the test, is confirming that no fare in that meter exceeds the maximum fare, because that is what is legislatively required. If somebody chooses to charge low amounts, medium amounts, that's fine. They cannot exceed the maximum fare. So whether they have one tariff in the fare, which is the maximum in the meter, which is the maximum fare, or 100 tariffs, one of which is the maximum fare, and the other 99 have to be below it for all journeys. That is what the test will be confirming. More and more with meters, that can be done through electronic confirmations. You don't have to do manual arithmetic. So you will, and we'll be relying to a large extent on the manufacturers to confirm how the software within their systems work. They're outside the market. They've got their own brand and reputation to protect, saying, well, what is a method we can test this robustly, securely, safely, straightforwardly, to confirm that fare 1, the maximum fare, is never exceeded by fares 2 to 100. But there will be a wide range of fares in those meters across taxis and across operators. Okay. And you would expect that in a market that is being responsive to its customers.
So you have the maximum fare?
Yes.
So say £3.50. And is it going to be on the meter that I can see as a customer when I leave the taxi, when I have to pay? Or is it £3.50, but then I can get a discount, because maximum is £3.50, say, for that journey? And can the taxi driver say, well, I give you a 10% discount?
We're working closely with the meter manufacturers to exactly how we can present that maximum fare for the journey.
Okay.
Say from Clarence Court to Parliament Buildings is however many miles, and every time the fare will be slightly different because waiting times may alter in traffic, because it's time and distance and time of day. How can we present that fare to the customer? Either in the cab or certainly on the receipt, so they can see, right, the maximum fare would have been, for sake of argument, £5.60. I have been charged £3.80. Therefore, I'm confident, and I've got a receipt in my hand, that I've been charged less than the maximum fare. And that is work ongoing with the manufacturers, hence our keenness to get the policy intent approved by the committee through the SO1, so we can really have those conversations for real. Whereas at the moment we're having the conversations, but we're not certain that the policy intent is approved through the SO1 process.
We're also working on a much clearer fares board. So at the minute there's a requirement for Belfast Public Care taxis to have a fares board in their taxi, but it's quite involved. If you look at some of the other evidence in Britain and Ireland of fares boards, instead of having the tariff in detail, they'll have what will you likely spend after a 1 mile journey, or a 3 mile journey, or a 5 mile journey. So it's just a bit easier to relate to. So that's the type of fares board we're working on as well, which will give the consumer more idea of what this maximum fare looks like in practice.
Pam, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. Just a wee supplementary on your question. I was just asked about certain days of the year, say New Year's Eve, where taxis traditionally would be maybe double the price. Is that maximum fare stop that charging, or is that still allowed?
There will be a maximum fare in place at all times. There are 3 tiers to the, you probably know this off the top of your head, Maxie. There are 3 tiers to the tariff. Tariff 1, I think it is in the SO1, but it isn't the SO1 I have in front of me. Normal times a day, 6 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night, Monday to Friday. There's a flag drop of £3, and that covers the first half mile. And after that, it's 20p per 224 yards. The metric system has passed us by in this gone. So per furlong, I believe, per furlong it's 20p. and 20p for every 73 seconds or part thereof while the vehicle is stationary. So that's the waiting.
Waiting time.
Tariff 2 has a flag drop of £3.40. The other figures are the same. And that is 8 p.m. at night till 6 o'clock in the morning, Monday to Thursday. Tariff 3, which is Friday at 8 o'clock in the evening, right through to Monday at 6 o'clock in the morning, and bank holidays, from 8 p.m. on the day before the bank holiday to 6 o'clock in the morning on the following day, is £4.20 for the flag drop, and all other figures are the same. Now, that is the maximum. That doesn't say taxi firms have to do that, but what it does say is that is the maximum they can charge. So this surge pricing that was talked about on the radio yesterday by a potential new entrant to the market could not go beyond that point. And indeed, they will have to show us that any pricing model like that is fully compliant with the maximum fare regulations and properly embedded in their meters. Hence, my keenness to get these regulations on the statute book before the market changes again.
Yeah, and why do we do this? Why do we say this is a maximum fare, but you're allowed to, vary it to go under? I mean, that could cause confusion for customers. I know there's competition, obviously, you're thinking of, and then with competition, then the customers would benefit. But, I mean, I would like to see the meter, when it says £5, I'll pay £5. Rather than sitting in the car thinking it could be £3.50 for one taxi and maybe then, a different price for another taxi.
It certainly will be a requirement that the fare you see ticking up on the meter as you go along will be the fare you pay.
Okay.
That's an important component. As Michael says, the fees board saying the maximum fare would be £5 a mile for sake of argument, or £6 in the evenings, whatever it is. That will give you some feel of the maximum fare. We are looking at how do we see that on the receipt. So you walk away from the taxi and you've got that evidence. And indeed, the operator and driver has that evidence as well. That works two-way. The answer to your more philosophical question, Chair, is the Assembly legislated for maximum fare. It didn't require standard fares. It didn't allow for standard fares. It didn't allow for minimum fares, which has been a topic of discussion in Londonderry, certainly, because there is a feeling that competition is driving people to the wall.
Yes. Yeah.
But the Assembly and the Department took the view that consumer protection required a maximum fare and meters to prove that.
Okay.
And the market should work within that, just as we regulate for a taxi driver test, if somebody's much better than that test, but they have to meet that minimum standard.
I think, Chair, what we also found when we were looking at setting the maximum fare was that if you look at, this has to apply across the whole of Northern Ireland, you'll find that in the larger towns and even some of the villages, the local taxi operators will have an agreed fare, and they operate to that, so they don't undercut each other. So that could well be below the maximum fare, and in fact, currently, we could point to a number of examples where that is the case. So they regulate, if you like, it's a form of self-regulation. So to be as prescriptive and set specific fares would not work for them. Okay. And they adjust that local fare, depending on how things go, such as fuel prices and so on. But they collectively do it. You will find, if you go to Ballymena, you go to Armagh, you go to Coleraine, you'll find that all the taxi companies, by and large, are working to the same fare structure.
Okay. So the meters will say how much the customer.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's no variation in that.
No.
You pay what the meter
as meters
says.
currently do in both private and public hire sectors.
Okay, Peter, you want to come?
Yeah, thank you. Just a few questions. First of all, just finally on the fares, but obviously the issue I think was raised, possibly Disability Action or Impact, in terms of any potential differentiation where it's a disabled passenger and that sort of thing. I wonder, just indicate first of all, to what extent then that deals with that situation.
The maximum fare will apply whatever it applies up to and including 4 passengers, and then it can increase by £1 per additional passenger for the larger vehicles. in terms then of wheelchairs and non-wheelchairs and other things within that fare structure?
The maximum fare will apply, so no matter what your vehicle is, the maximum fare. Now, you might find that if you're an operator with some large vehicles and some regular taxis, you might pitch the larger vehicles at the maximum fare, actually it's set on the maximum fare, where you might have a reduced rate for your... But it's capped.
It'll be blind to whoever actually is effectively getting in, if you like, on that basis, irrespective of what their situation is.
Yeah, well, the meter will show what they're charging, but you might expect in the larger vehicles that meter will be the maximum.
On the fare boards you were talking about, which would then apply, how quickly would those be in, type of thing? Because I think it's important, obviously, that not simply... is there sort of restriction that people actually then see? You've indicated, obviously, that this is something which is already done by the car, for instance, and that side of things. I suppose the concern at times is you would maybe get, if you're like a consumer through ignorance, would then get charged something additional because it's not particularly visible as to what they should be.
Well, we would need, because the fare boards in the public hire vehicles would need to be removed, because there wouldn't be a regulated fare for them anymore. There'd be the maximum fare, but each individual public hire driver and operator could decide that they charge the maximum or something different. That would be their entitlement, which they don't have at the moment. It's a loss of control they have at the moment. We would therefore need to introduce the new fare boards at the same time when the fares are implemented.
The fare boards, what would be the price of those?
They'll be provided by the department.
They will be provided by the department in a form that is easily displayable in a taxi.
Yeah.
On the issue, I'm a little bit puzzled on the issue of the taximeter centres. I'm just wondering, how do we get ourselves into this position? Because you've indicated, obviously, as part of that, this went through in the legislation, and you've then been told legally this is something you can't do at present. How did that come about? Because it seems surely the point at which it should have been picked up that if there was some sort of legal problem with taximeter centres, surely whenever initially it was going through legislation, that's something that should have been picked up.
What I can't read backwards, we may rely on you and Cahill, Peter, that I'm not sure exactly how clearly articulated was the intention around how meters would be sealed back in 2007 when the bill was being debated. We have, over the years since, formed a view within the department, approved taximeter centres, but I don't know whether that was clearly in people's minds when the bill was drafted and enacted. We had come to that conclusion. I think, actually, by coming to this different place, we have ended up with a model that is both cheaper, but more importantly, very clearly copper fastens a separation of duties between operators, fitters, and DVA, the department, sealing the meters and signing them as fit for purpose and sealed and robust.
Just then from a process point of view, because you indicated that the intention was, if you like, to go with this model, and if then, in terms of whatever, from a practical point of view, it was then felt that the meter centres was the way to go forward. Now, I think there will be certainly a reaction and kickback in terms of lack of meter centres, because people have seen this as being a central element of things. Would that then require primary legislation,
Yes.
or would require primary legislation to put that in place?
So we'd be looking at, I would be seeing that as part of, you haven't mentioned it yet this morning, Cal, but the review of the Act and its implementation, the 2-year review, we'd said. There's a debate about when the 2 years starts. One of the elements to be brought forward would be that piece. No doubt there would be many other pieces. And that would take it into the next legislative mandate, and either of it a freestanding taxi amendment bill or in with other things that were being brought forward.
I suppose the issue, which would have gravest concern of, which has been raised with us, you mentioned, I think, Ian, in answer to your last question, really, that the idea was, I feel like, a separation of powers, for want of a better word. The problem I see a little bit is that and you have, if you like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of Northern Ireland, in terms of the meter companies, there's about 5 or 6 meter suppliers that would be used in Northern Ireland mainly, or is that a reasonable assumption? And at the moment, they have operators that maybe say about 10 or a dozen operators throughout Northern Ireland. I think one of the companies operates with 6 different franchises in that regard. I agree with you. I think it's very important that we have independence of operations. That what makes me, I have to say, very uneasy with the idea that in terms of the installation, there's no restriction on who that can be. You mentioned about the difference between installation and the operation on it. And I suppose the concern would be that you essentially have either directly or indirectly, by way of Chinese walls, essentially, and obviously, no offence, Chair, on that regard, on that basis that you then get essentially a situation where a firm basically fit their own meters. And I would have thought from the point of view of confidence, and I appreciate you've got the DVA situation in terms of checking, I would have thought simply a carte blanche in terms of who could install. It's not something, I wonder, given the fact you'll have a prescribed list of the manufacturers in that regard, why it simply isn't then restricted to those who have a franchise with those. I mean, there is at least a degree of market there, rather than run the risk, and indeed I think almost a near certainty that there will be some sort of, at some stage, fiddling going on with people fitting them independently themselves, and people who are not, even if they're actually intending to do the thing, who are not particularly qualified to install doing that. I mean, why not have some level of, if you're going to have it prescribed in terms of the list, that then some sort of provision that it would be those who are authorised by those companies to fit do so?
And the simple answer is the legislation doesn't allow us to regulate those fitters. It allows us to say the meter has to be MID compliant. That's actually what the law says. We will, through a service for operators, users, others, say these are the meters, manufacturer A, model 1234, they are MID compliant. By implication, the following are not MID compliant. And many people will go to the agent because of the way the maintenance and ongoing support will come in as things they will get. Others will choose, indeed some will choose, look at the second-hand market for meters rather than the new market. And the legislation does not enable. We can look at how we can say who the agents for the manufacturers are, factual information, who the agents for manufacturer A is in Northern Ireland. But we can't say so-and-so is licensed to be a taxi meter fitter and such is not. That is not a power the law gives us.
Is there not a provision that you can say that those installing the meters have got to be authorised by the companies? If you're ring fencing, if you like, the what is there in that regard as to some sort of authorisation from the companies?
I think certainly what we could say is that they have to be fitted within the manufacturer's prescribed instructions. Because if you buy a meter, obviously the manufacturer will provide the detail of how it's installed.
By prescribed instructions, I'm trying to see if there's a different way to track this, Alex, in that regard. By prescribed instructions, and the manufacturer's instructions be that they are the only people who are fit to fit a meter, those who actually are authorised by them?
That's something we could explore with the manufacturers. We could
certainly look at that. I think Ian makes a valid point, Peter, as well. We know, for example, that if you go on to some of the websites, Gumtree or some of those, you'll see meters for sale, and you will have taxi drivers who will buy those off the web.
You see, Alex, that's one of the things that would worry me.
Yes, absolutely.
And it does strike me if there's a provision that, in terms of prescribed, under the prescribed instructions, and if those instructions can be precise enough to say that from the manufacturers that it is only those that they authorise to install.
We'll go away and see
the side of things. I'm concerned whether through either malevolent intent or good intent of somebody looking to cut a few corners of that, but to buy something off the internet, get their mate to fit it, and you're left with something.
The only
but then would that not be the role of DOE when you're testing the meter?
Well, we're testing how the meter, the fares the meter puts out. By that time, a lot of the wiring. And you and I, Chair, will recall we saw a demonstration of the dangers of bad wiring and shorts in a vehicle.
Okay.
A large amount of that by that stage will be hidden behind the fascia, and you would need to start dismantling that to see it.
Yes, the problem from that point of view is that there's a safety issue there. There's issues which go purely beyond just.
I mean, anybody, a taxi driver is operating a business. He has health and safety duties to ensure the safety of people travelling in the vehicle run by that business, whether he's a private individual or a limited company. So there is general safety law around it. I think we need to pull that more to the forefront of people's minds, potentially, as well as looking at how do we very strongly encourage, if we can't require people to go through the approved channels, shall we call them.
And just by way of clarification, Peter, not to worry you any more than you are already concerned, DVA do not test the fitting of the meter when it comes in. That is not part of their responsibility. So whatever wiring is there or however it is fitted, they are simply there to test
I'm trying to say, Alex, I'm at the high point of anxiety at present.
Well, we can bring to the forefront the general health and safety legislation, health and safety at work acts
From that
and so
point
on.
of view, and I appreciate that you've got to have the conversation then with the manufacturers. If the manufacturers were turning around to you and saying, in terms of the approved bid, we would require us to comply with our instructions that it is an authorised person by ourselves to be fitting our particular equipment, that would be something then that could be reflected.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other issue, I suppose, just has been raised in terms of, from the checks point of view, if you've got to check the meters through DVA on that bit, what about the situation? How quickly can you turn that around if you get a situation of, to give an example, say you have a driver involved in an accident, the company requires that taxi equipment to be fitted to a temporary vehicle, in that regard, I mean, which is maybe, say, supplied by an insurance company. What would be the speed of turnaround, or is there, I mean, one of the things that the concern would be that you would have drivers more or less putting their heels for a while that they couldn't get in?
Well, subject to that meter being fitted properly, back to that immediately preceding conversation, in that new vehicle, and it does have to be calibrated against the vehicle because of the way different wheels turn and so on. They will be tested in the DVA vehicle test centres, which are open extended hours and extended days of the week. And there will be a number of staff in each of those test centres trained to do, not every member of staff in each test centre will be able to do taxi meter tests, but a number will be able to do them in each place. So therefore, and it doesn't involve going down the lane where you're doing the vehicle test, is obviously off to one side. So we can look at how we commit to turnaround times for that. To date, for the public hire vehicles, which require exactly the same arrangement, there has never been a problem that I'm aware of with rapid turnaround where circumstances require it.
Okay, thank
But
you.
we can look at what commitments we can make.
I suppose
around
the
that.
other final issue just was there was a concern over, I appreciate people want this in as quickly as possible, but I think in the email we got last week there was an issue about whether the speed of turnaround from the end of September to the end of October was doable from the fitting point of view for all that needed to be fitted within the industry.
Just to explain the timetable,
there's a
if
time,
once
for
the committee, subject to, I won't presume anything, subject to the committee approving the policy intent through the SL1, which is the mechanism we have for that, we will swing into action with communication with the industry shortly thereafter, let's say during May. Okay. So we have from May to end of October. We have from the end of September, you're required to have these things in. Therefore, a vehicle coming for test on the 29th of September, in theory, would need a sealed meter, but we're saying we're giving another month's grace there, just to let things bed in.
Okay.
And if your vehicle isn't due for test, say, until June, it'll have been done this June before the provisions come in. You're not going to wait till June 2016, you'll have to come in by January 2016.
And just, I suppose, sorry, the one thing finally, because the issues get raised, in terms of issue raised by the Belfast Taxi Association and the MID certificate existing, but just talk us through how that will operate and why then, what additional will be needed for somebody who's in that position. If they're saying, well, actually, we've got something which is already fit for purpose, why do we have to do anything additional beyond that?
I was involved with a meeting with the Belfast Taxi Association in October 2012. There'd been a meeting with departmental staff in February 2012, and a number of things were followed up from that. I was involved, I think, as was Alex, Michael may or may not have been, and DVA staff as well, on a number of issues, including meters. It wasn't just meters. And the key issue...
They have consulted with EU representatives on this as well.
And the manufacturer, or certainly the UK supplier of the equipment, was in the room as well. I can't say they actually manufactured it as a firm based in England. And at that point, we asked pointedly, do you have a certificate of mid-compliance for this equipment? And we did not get a straight answer. They said, we need to go away and clarify that. The manufacturer did, not the Taxi Association. It's called a data head, and it does many things, including where's the depot gets a call for a taxi to come to Parliament buildings. Where's the nearest taxi? And it sends an instruction to that taxi to proceed to Parliament buildings. It allows them to see where their fleet is. It does many things. It also calculates the fare, but in default position, it calculates the fare using GPS. That is not legally allowed under the Taxis Act. You have to count the number of times the wheel turns, simplistically. And the data head has a module that attaches to the wheel. So to be a taxi meter in our legislation, it would have to have that module inserted. I don't know how many of the data heads in Northern Ireland have that inserted. I know some companies use data heads and separately have a meter. They don't use the meter part.
That module, I mean, maybe to a level of technology slightly beyond me in that regard, but if that module is inserted into a pre-existing one, would that make that compatible?
As long as it was then sealed in. The second question, so there's that question, that would, as far as we're aware, get in a mid-certificate, but we are still going backwards and forwards and clarifying that each of the different versions of this data head, and of course they've altered over time, new versions have been released, is mid-compliant. But there is the secondary question of putting a metal seal on a meter, which will stop you turning, in the old days, the dials in the meter to change the fares, will not work in an electronic device where the depot has control over everything going on in that electronic device. So how do we put an electronic seal on that? So DVA tests it, says all the fares are underneath the maximum fare. We seal it electronically. Is it by the PIN code actually being held by DVA and not the operator? These are the things we need to work through with the manufacturer. And it must apply in many other jurisdictions. We're not doing something completely new here. How do we stop inadvertent or malevolent tampering with that? It could be the guy in the depot pushes the wrong button and it changes a fare. How do we stop that happening? That's the second question. We now have, if the policy intent is approved, we will get into those detailed discussions. We've been somewhat holding back because we know the committee's been very interested in taxi matters. We haven't wanted to leap in and assume we're getting some criticism for holding back with information. We're sort of damned if we do and damned if we don't. But we would anticipate, assuming the policy intent is approved, we roll out communications to the fitting industry, the taxi industry, the manufacturers, users, etc., as soon as we could.
And you don't have much time, Ian?
No. I was worried last time, Chair, you kept saying, I watched it back last Friday afternoon, you kept saying, well, there's enough time for this, there's enough time, there's quite a bit of time. It doesn't feel like it over here, I can assure you of the time.
Sure. Okay. Cal?
Thanks, Chair. And Ian, thank you very much. Just a couple of points. And I certainly wouldn't be worried about time, Ian. After 8 years, I wouldn't be worried. Perfectly honest. Just a couple of points. See, in terms of, are you saying in primary legislation, one, there's no facility for standard or minimum fares? Is that what you
Correct.
said?
There's a maximum fare in
There's a max fare in law. We could regulate that if we decide. But you say about have to change that in primary legislation?
There's no,
Right.
there is no power in legislation for a minimum fare.
Right,
The maximum fare was seen as a consumer protection element.
And just quickly, as part of the consultation, what way did that come up in terms of the whole industry?
69% of respondents were in favour of a maximum fare. There were some discussions around the unsocial hours premium and whether reading across from Britain worked in Northern Ireland, and as we explained, we went down and drilled down into that and were content that the 3 fare bands I read out in answer to Mrs Cameron's question were the appropriate times of day and days of week.
You're saying the majority of the industry were content?
Yes.
They were content with the general approach that was maximum fare, but there was the issue in the area where they wanted the minimum fare, but it was explained that wasn't possible within the powers of the department. There were a lot of people when we went out with our tariffs and the times of day, there were a lot of comments. Well, instead of 8 o'clock, my experience is that it's 9 or half 9 or that type of thing. So there were a lot of different views. But that's why, as Ian said, we've gone back to the new data we've got from the ITP reports and have identified where these peaks actually happen. Information that we didn't have at the time of the consultation.
No, and the only reason I asked that, because I wouldn't be using the legislative process to say would hold it up, because if we ever desired to change it, we could go down that route.
Yeah.
You know, so the industry, the majority of the industry was saying that. See, in terms of the meter and the meter centres, you also indicated that wasn't part of the process either in terms of primary legislation.
Correct.
No.
The power to regulate.
It seems to be a bit strange. We went down this route and went to all this bother because Peter remembered as much as I do the amount of weeks we went through all of this, and still we were bringing something forward to introduce meters, but still in all we had no plan as to how they were going to be fitted and how they were going to be tested. And we are now with it. I certainly would see that some of the problems Peter had indicated there in relation to the fitting of them, the sealing of them, whether or not, there's a regulation will be able to control them. So I think, other than guidelines, I think we need to stipulate or work with the industry or whatever it is. You indicated there was 2 or 3 types of meter to stop this issue you said about buying online. I mean, you may be able to buy those type online, I don't know, but that's up to but there certainly needs to be proper regulation to ensure those meters.
Absolutely, and I've seen the demonstrations and we're all aware of the potential. There's quite a lot of flammable material in a car. If there's an electrical short,
Yeah.
things move on pretty quickly. Yes, taxis have got to have a fire extinguisher in there, but you've got to have whether you would have time to do all of that.
You wouldn't want an electrical fault in a diesel, can you? That's for sure.
No. So we will look at how do we stipulate, at the very least with a small s, and educate so that the cheapest don't always rush to the bottom.
So basically you're talking about an MOT for a meter here. Basically, it gets fitted, it's taken somewhere,
Yeah.
or
Road
whatever.
test.
They have to present it at some point.
Yes.
To you.
But of course the wiring will be deep
No,
behind the
that's-
fascia.
and
The,
that's-
the only other thing with that second-hand, but you might find a second-hand meter itself, the device is okay, but there's also the test of the program, the computer program that's working out the pulses. So there's a dual test. So obviously we're testing the meter works, the functionality, but DVA will also have a list of checksums, which is basically like a unique identifier number for each computer program. So if you went to Gumtree and you bought a approved taximeter off the site, chances are it won't have the checksum, which is DVA's way of making sure the computer program is right. So to get the correct checksum, at the minute you'd certainly need to go to a manufacturer's fitter to do that, because it requires a computer system to change that checksum and ensure that the new tariff is accurate.
Right, so then who's liable then for that? I mean, if there's any issues with it, is it the manufacturer,
Well,
is it the fitter, or is it the...
Well, as the taxi driver, if you come to test with an approved meter, but your checksum isn't on the list, and checksums will be well known to drivers and are at the minute to Belfast public car drivers, if you come, the taximeter wouldn't pass. So it's a further way of ensuring that not only is the device functioning correctly, but that the computer program, DVA are satisfied at how that computer program works.
Okay.
But we will commit that we will go and look at how we can steer, guide, prod, nudge, without being able to mandate people to certain channels, and how we can work with the manufacturers who have an interest in this, because if things are being fitted wrongly and going wrong...
On that basis on it, I mean, there's another provision that you can say, provision within that the installation must be compatible with the instructions of the manufacturer.
We were looking at that, certainly,
We
weren't
can look at that, yeah.
And then obviously sketching out the detail of that.
But what we can't say is only firms A, B and C can do it.
No, but if you can do it by inference, which
Yes.
is essentially that if you have on the face of the regulations that it is by way of the instructions of the manufacturer,
Yes.
and if the manufacturers are then saying very clearly our instructions are, and that would be the route.
Certainly happy to commit to that, and happy to commit to meeting the East Belfast taxis. I don't think they've approached us directly for a meeting, but we'll go back to them. We have been maintaining contact with them, but as I say, we'd been anxious to avoid jumping ahead of the legislative process in this regard.
Okay. Members, then, are you content then for the department to proceed with making the taxi meters and fares regulation NI 2015?
I would say content may not be the word, Chair, but subject to the assurances that have been given, I think.
Yeah, subject to that.
But I think we will look at the SR.
The committee content for them to proceed? I'm just concerned about the time element, if we really want to start in September 2015. Given
And
the
September is a
assurances and
crucial-
the commitment from Yen and his colleague that
And I should explain, Chair, September to January is a crucial window when MOT testing reduces because more people buy cars at the beginning of the year because of the second-hand value. We have capacity in the test centres from September to January. That wasn't plucked out of the air that date. If we go beyond that window, we're really struggling, because from 1st of February into May is the peak capacity for vehicle testing.
Right. Yeah, true. So, members, you content?
Agreed.
Subject to the assurances and the commitment from the department. Agreed?
And perhaps the clerk would pin us to our collar in terms of what those commitments were. Kim.
Yeah, well, you come back to talk to us about
I thought I
progress.
wasn't coming back on taxes, Chair. I thought this was my last go.
Okay, members, content? Right.
You're
Do you want me to move?
It's a filter system.
Then we moved on to the next one. I'm aware of the time that
Yes.
I know some members may need to go.
Can I give
fairly
you a
soon.
brief opening statement that I believe
Yeah,
covers
you
the
do
disability
yeah,
action
please
points?
proceed then. please.
I will try and pick out the key points. Throughout the development of the programme, the Department has sought to balance the needs and views of the taxi-using public with the needs and views
No, sorry, I'm
sorry.
not indicating you.
of the taxi industry. This hasn't always been simple. We've had to find a workable compromise meeting the requirements of wheelchair users with the cost impact on the industry. And we want to promote the provision of wheelchair accessible vehicles. We could have a wonderful specification, but nobody agreeing to go and buy against it. That's the balance we've been striking. So we used an expert consultancy firm, ITP Limited, and Michael's already referenced them, and it was referenced last week, to help us in that work, to draw on the expertise and to look at other jurisdictions. And we came up with a draft specification, which was a developing document. And we've had assembly questions about where is that specification. It's laid out how it emerged and developed. I believe the term is co-design, is the policy term these days. And we've talked with manufacturers and vehicle converters, because sometimes vehicles are converted during their life. And all manufacturers design their vehicles around what is known as a reference wheelchair, a standard size which is used in designing all forms of transport from trains to buses to taxis. All accessible taxis currently on the market are constructed to enable the use of this reference wheelchair as a basic minimum. A move away from this industry standard would in many instances require a redesign of body structures and door framing, which of course is both expensive and potentially detrimental to the integrity of the vehicle. As an example, Disability Action requested minimum door aperture should be set at 800mm rather than 750mm, with similar changes to the ramp width. We can understand absolutely why those points are being brought forward, but that single change of going beyond, for instance, 700mm for a ramp, going to 701mm, would rule out the TX4 London taxi, it would rule out the VW Kudos, and we suspect the majority of the current fleet. So going beyond that number would mean no London taxis could operate in Belfast. So it's very significant, what seems like quite a technical change. In terms of rear loading vehicles, we have been neutral in the specification between rear and side loading, trying to encourage as many types of vehicle into the market as possible, recognising many wheelchair users by choice use rear loading in their own vehicles, others use side loading. We've wanted to enable both. Regarding their use on ranks, and that was raised last week, the first thing I should say is we're not expecting much use of rear loading wheelchair accessible vehicles on ranks. The evidence from the rank surveys, and ITP did hundreds of hours of filming at ranks, is wheelchair uptake from ranks is very low.
Yeah.
Predominantly wheelchair users have their regular taxi drivers from whatever sector, and they take them door to door. They're familiar with their needs, they know everything about them. And there's no impediment to the use of rear loading wheelchair accessible vehicles outside Belfast at the moment. There is also the issue of loading and particularly unloading on the street, and that was raised. On this issue, many wheelchair users, as say, already use rear loading in taxis and in their own vehicles. There's also an ongoing requirement for individuals and businesses to operate in a safe way, and this will continue from that partnership of taxi driver and wheelchair user, getting them in and out in a safe way in a safe place. And Disability Action also raised the issue about tripping on the step. We have reviewed this risk against the benefits of reducing the height by putting the intermediate step in, and believe we've provided for a safe and suitable solution, which also mirrors the solution in place in London, for instance, the specification. A further non-engineering point Disability Action made last week was that many of the problems of wheelchair users are not to do with the vehicle, but to do with the knowledge and understanding of the driver, inadvertent or whatever. This is a situation we've already taken action to remedy through the introduction of testing for new drivers and mandatory training for all taxi drivers. Within this, we have legislated mandatory content on disability awareness. This includes safety issues as well as customer care issues. So we've taken that very seriously. It's a mandatory module within the training requirements. In short, we've worked hard to strike a balance between accessibility and costs and to tackle training issues. We believe with all of that expert input from the taxi industry as well as ITP, we've struck an appropriate balance.
Thank you, Ian. It is, as you say, balancing the needs of the disability sector and cost to the industry, and you don't want then the industry then to say, well, it's going to be too expensive for us to change our car to go with the requirement. I think Peter mentioned that earlier. They talked to us previously to say that they are charged £8 by private hire and £3.50 by public hire. That DOE was supposed to go and talk to the industries about it. Have you spoken to them?
We're aware of public hire have a regulated fare. They can't distinguish between who climbs into their cab. As Michael indicated, often wheelchair users in private hire will have the larger vehicles that attract a higher tariff, but predominantly for the use by multiple people. But if you're taking a wheelchair, you've got to have one of those larger vehicles. Their equality legislation enables that because you are charging a price for the higher vehicle. Larger vehicle, a higher price for the larger vehicle, sorry. You're not saying you are disabled, therefore we're charging you more.
Okay.
This has been round, and there's quite a detailed section on the Equality Commission website which suggests it has been something taken to them a number of times, that they've developed that detailed material. So if you turn up in car A and say, well, if you're able-bodied, I charge you £3, but because you're in a wheelchair, I'm going to charge you £5, that is discrimination, which is already outlawed under equality legislation, and cases would be taken under that legislation. If you turn up and say, I've had to bring a bigger vehicle because you are in a wheelchair, the charge for this is £5. If I could have brought a saloon car, I would have been £3, but anybody who uses this bigger vehicle is charged £5. That is allowable under legislation, and indeed the taxi operators would say that is part of them having a mixed fleet. They need to charge more for the larger vehicles. Okay. The public hire guys, of course, have the opportunity to say, we're going to carry on charging the same whatever you are, and that's an opportunity for them to market their difference from the rest of the taxi industry.
Okay, right, fair enough. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that was useful, and I think we had a very useful session, I think, with both Disability Action and IMTAC. So we'll just take you through a couple of issues, and to some extent you've addressed a couple of these within your... In fact, you've addressed probably most of these. There's a large thing I want to expand just on. It's useful, I think it's useful that you've mentioned in relation to the training, because that's the one non-legislative point of view, I suppose, that was directly with reference. As regards to the dimensions side of it, I appreciated where Disability Action were coming from, but certainly I take on board what you've said. I think it's quite a reasonable point the department's made in terms of the availability on the marketplace. So I certainly wouldn't push that issue. I suppose just really on three issues then. On the rear loading issue, Chair, maybe useful on this. Seems to be there are three situations with regard to the rear loading. There's the situation of essentially the pick up at home type situation, which particularly IMTAC recognised, and that's particularly, I suppose, in, shall we say, non-city areas, but can be in that bit, which I think everybody acknowledges there isn't any particular problem with. Specifically on the ranks, the regulation of the ranks is outside your control. It's within DRD. Chair, there was a very, I think, specific issues have been raised by Disability Action in terms of the ranks, and I appreciate that's directly outside our measure. Chair, could I propose on that issue that the committee write to the DRD committee, as we'll have to go through the committees, highlighting that issue and indicating the concerns that have been raised? I mean, it's up to DRD. They will have to take forward if there's any regulations in relation to that, but that seems to be the most acute point as regards to, I don't know whether, sure, if that formally just could be.
I'm sure there's no problem.
Then, you've mentioned in terms of the safe way of the pick-up on the streets now, there's general provisions already. Can we get an assurance that in terms of NASR that there is then some sort of provision that the health and safety of pickups will be contained within that for the wheelchair side of it? That maybe we can reinforce.
We'll look at how we can. I mean, health and safety legislation applies whether it's mentioned or not. We'll see how we can copy fast.
I think it would be important in terms of NASR that is directly picked up.
Yeah.
On the issue of the tripping issue, because it's been raised both in terms of the height and the angle of things, and also the width, and you indicated in terms of London standards and that type of thing. Obviously, there's been concern been raised over a tripping bed. I wonder just if you could address that in a bit more detail.
The step
both in terms of change on the height side of it, but also I think putting in a new regulation at least as regards to the width side of it as well. I think at 200.
It's 200 millimetres deep, so the step has to be 200 millimetres deep, and then 400. The depth is
the depth then. Sorry, at 200.
So at the minute there's no requirement for depth, and at the minute, if the floor of your taxi is 435 or above, you have to put in a step. We're reducing that to 380, So if you have a taxi of over that the first step into your vehicle is over 380, you have to fit a step, and when that applies to your taxi, that step must be 200 millimetres deep, and that's to take account of people, you know, to get a good foothold on the step, to specify exactly, well, this is a step that has been.
Just take it back as well, just about whenever we're talking in terms of the 380 and the 435, because obviously there's a change that it's a lower level you're going to have to require. What was the, I mean, I understand one sense of logic would say, obviously the higher you go, the more there is a need for a step.
Yeah.
I understand that. But specifically as a change from 435 to 380, what was the rationale, or why were those figures picked? Why was it felt necessary to change that? Was 35 not sufficient? Or?
I think the general desire for people with access difficulties that the vehicles are lower, so that over time will encourage a lower floored fleet, than that you either have a lower floored car, or if you don't, you have a step. So there will be no occasions there where, for instance, you'll be stepping into a vehicle that's 420 or 425. So the first step that you'll take now, you know, coming from 2020, when the grandfather rights expires, would be that you have the 380 becomes the new height into the vehicle. So it just means that it's easier for people to access the vehicles. Now, if you're talking about, you know, whereabouts, how that 380 or 435, where ITP came to that, again, they just looked at other jurisdictions where that specification was in existence, and they looked at the surveys with people who have disabilities to find out what would be easy to use and what's more difficult. I think the tripping hazard issue was more about, if you have to have a step, there may be an underhang from the car floor, because then you're stepping on to the new step and having to step into the vehicle. And because we're saying for the first time that it has to be 200 millimetres deep, then there's also a requirement that the step isn't a danger. So if the step started at the edge of the vehicle, 200 millimetres might be too wide for the vehicle, so that it would cause a danger for the public.
Okay, I understand in terms of the height side of it. In terms of the depth end of it, are we over-engineering a solution in terms of depth? Is there a need to put in directly a depth in that regard? Or would not potentially you could create? I mean, on either. I mean, appreciate what's said in terms of the dangers and almost whatever you do, there could be some level of tripping hazard. But it would not slightly over-engineering a situation.
The equivalent, the proposed NI requirement is identical to the London requirement, but we only require a depth of 200 mil, where London requires 250 mil. So they have it specifically as a requirement as part of their
conditions of fitness.
In Ireland, no step can protrude more than 10 millimetres beyond the vehicle superstructure, excluding mirrors, whilst the vehicle is moving, and 200 depth requirement applies.
Also, the depth it's not so much getting into the vehicle where you might have a full foothold, but when you're coming out of the vehicle and there's a lip, you know, that's where the depth can.
And many people with arthritis and so on will have adapted their walking style. It may not be classic ball of the foot stuff. They need more of the foot on the step.
We're also obviously introducing a requirement to have grab rails that are contrasting in colours, slip resistant, you know, so it's not
and the
just
step
the
will
step.
have coloured edges, won't it, so that people can see the edge.
One other issue I want to touch on, I know Ian, was mentioned, I think, with maybe contrasting views by Disability Action and IMTAC, and been obviously a lot of discussion around. Part of this is obviously to try, with all these bits, there's a balance to be struck in terms of ensuring that what is there in terms of the industry has standards which are fit for purpose, balanced against the need to have people have sufficient recouping of current investment in terms of the situation with both with the current existing situation and that bit, and because obviously the one thing, and I think IMTAC were very strong on this in a broader level on it, they didn't want things put in place which would actually in any way curtail the fleet. I mean, they're concerned, particularly, I think, to be fair, outside of Belfast, there's a lack of wheelchair accessible vehicles, particularly outside of Belfast. So there's been battered around the issue of the grandfather rights in terms of duration on that side of it, and we've had, if you like, the two contrasting attempts at a compromise where the department's proposing a 5-year period. I think that would back that up. Disability Action said they are comfortable with 7-year, as indeed taxi drivers. I'm wondering, who's finally to kill off this issue, whether there's been merit at least in a compromise position between those bits, whether the department are willing to agree a 6-year period of grandfather rights as part of the rule. sort of a midway point between what is being required and what would be asked, which again would fall short of what people would want in some cases on it, but at least would be an improvement on what was there.
One thing with grandfather rights is I'm keen to get all the grandfather rights out of the way before I become a grandfather. So that's one of my aims on this. I take the point we don't want to reduce the current fleet, but we are trying to move to an improved fleet, and it's trying to strike a balance there between people who may recently have invested in vehicles meeting the current spec and how long can they continue. I mean, reflecting on it, the existing vehicles need to continue to meet the current spec. They can't nosedive in quality and drop off the bottom because the grandfather rights disappear. They have to continue meeting the current spec. I'm content to agree to 6 years if that is agreeable to the committee as an amendment to SL1.
Propose that then to the committee as 6 years of compromise between the positions of that?
I would have stuck with 7, but I mean, there's a proposal on the table. I mean, I'm happy enough to support that proposal by Peter.
Members, do you want to put this to a vote? Or
I think we can agree that, can't we?
Agree.
We could agree that.
I think, Peter,
agree
we can also give some
yeah.
further reassurance in that the Act does allow the point you were making about under provision, either outside Belfast or within. Within the Act, it does allow the Department to prescribe to an operator how many wheelchair accessible vehicles they have if it was found that there was an under provision. Now, it's not something I think the department would want to do. We would prefer that the market forces determine, the number of wheelchair accessible vehicles that are needed. But it is actually hot-wired into the 2008 Act. So, to...
By an approved installer?
Pardon?
By an approved installer, yes.
And again, it would come, I don't know why I look at Cahill every time we talk about review of the Act, but that would be another element. And that needs 2 or 3 years to settle down because of the investment cost. But the Act allows us on larger operators, I forget whether it's hardwired in as to what a larger operator is, but the larger fleets, we wouldn't be requiring somebody with 3 cows to go and get 2 wheelchair. It's the larger fleets.
I think, Chair, something that obviously it's probably a practical issue which I think would maybe just need to be kept an eye on.
We want enough of these vehicles out here to a good enough standard to meet the needs of disabled people.
Yeah, and it is balancing it really with the costs, that would that may put some taxi drivers off for continuing with disability access vehicles. Okay, members, Sandra, you okay? You support that?
Yes, that's fine.
Don't mind.
So, no more questions, John? Cahill.
Sorry.
Cahill. I thought you've already asked. Yes.
Thanks for boiling.
I'll go out and come back in. No. I do appreciate the proposal from Peter, because I mean, I know that the industry we've talked about, there's been a lot of investment over the last number of years, and extra year to give them an opportunity. But the point I want to bring up, Chair, and I think we need to reinforce this issue about the rear loading on the ranks, and I know it's a DRD issue, but I would definitely hope I'd get the support of the committee here, because you are introducing regulation from a DOE point of view. I would ask that a better cooperation and better links with the department in terms of DRD. I know we are going to write the DRD as a committee, but I think the departments need to work together on this here, because clearly outside of it, and you mentioned Armagh earlier on, Alex, I mean, I know there's certain types of vehicles and they're wheelchair accessible, and it's not a problem in the housing estate. But certainly from a road safety point of view, loading from behind in the ranks is a different matter completely. Totally different. I mean, I still have issues with that. So I'd appreciate and understand and a better working relationship in relation to that matter from yourselves with DRD, and we write the DRD to 3. We're looking at DRD in terms of more ranks and different things.
Yeah. Well, we are working very closely with DRD, and indeed Michael was talking to them yesterday about this very specific matter, and they came forward, and this was in a sort of chat rather than a formal DRD view, that, and indeed from next May we will be in the same department as well, that the wheelchair loading at ranks only occurs at the front position in the rank, not at any position in the rank. By definition, people get in a vehicle at the front. If there's 5 taxis in the rank, they're getting in the front vehicle. So we need to look at the infrastructure around that front vehicle and the safety, not the back vehicle on the rank. whether that be a drop curb or space. DRD's other point is there's no lines drawn to show individual spaces on the rank. There is a length of rank. Yeah. But how do we look at giving enough space? Because people may have heavy stuff to put in a boot on the rank as well. It's not just a wheelchair.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that, but there's not enough room in the ranks at the minute. But I mean, that's grand.
That's a DRD.
No, exactly. I appreciate it, and that's why I'm saying to you, I mean, it shouldn't be just a DRD issue, you know.
No, we are working closely, and for instance, DRD will have to amend their regulations on bus lanes to do with the taxi licensing regulations.
Okay, and one other point, back to the review, and now that we've done a review year in, year out on the taxis, the last 8 years, we're still built in for our 2-year review. Yeah.
I committed that to the committee a while back. The issue not for today, I hasten to add, is when that 2 years starts, because what we don't want to do is be premature in that review, but neither do we want to be post-mature, if that's the right word. We want to have enough evidence without problems being left to lie, and that will be the challenge. I know Michael is looking very much at this phase of work, and but we need to then say, right, what comes next?
I think, Carl, we have been quite methodical based on engagement with the committee and indeed with our consultations and our contact with solicitors, that we are maintaining a log, if you like, of issues that have arisen, you know, in terms of where the Act may or could be improved. So, you know, that would be an initial starting point for us to...
The blueprint actually is nearly there from what maybe...
Yeah. Well, if members here choose to be on the committee for the Department for Infrastructure, I'm sure they will be heavily involved in a review of the Taxis Act.
Good luck, Peter. Good luck with that, Peter.
Okay. Yeah.
Are members content? Sorry, I
just want to ask one more, just to follow up. About what Disability Action mentioned about communication aids in taxis where there is no partition. So I think when there are regulations for an intercom and loop system where there is a partition between driver and passenger, but don't clarify the requirement for communication aids when there is no partition.
The proposal, it's almost by omission that the proposal is that if you have a partition, you need this because there's a physical barrier to communication. Yeah. There was no recommendation, nor was it raised as an issue during the survey stage that the vehicles that didn't have partitions required that type of induction loop or communication system. So it's not proposed that we would place that requirement on Class B taxis that don't have a partition.
Okay, so you think it's good enough without the need for communication?
It hasn't been raised. The first time it was raised was last week, and you know we went back to our surveys, our original kind of the raw data from the surveys, and it didn't appear in those. So it's obviously there's a cost to all this, so we don't want to impose costs that we don't think there would be a real benefit to. So we went on the line of just those that have partitions.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. No, I just wanted to come in on the issue of charging more for disability taxi, and you talked about the Equality Commission having looked at it, and the charges because the vehicle is larger rather than a standard vehicle. But surely it's the difference in the choice. Like a disabled person maybe doesn't have the choice of going for the cheaper option, whereas everybody else has a choice of requesting the cheaper taxi, and is that not?
Well, in fact, some disabled people prefer to travel in an ordinary saloon car and put their wheelchair in the boot.
Okay.
So you know there is a choice. It's not a. I suppose it depends, and this is where it's difficult. It depends on the degree of disability.
Yeah, of course.
And you know,
yes, if you're forced because of your situation to be in a wheelchair at all times and can't slide out of it, it's a different place than somebody who can slide across with the help of the driver. But for that to change to say you cannot charge the max, whatever the legislation may be, that would be equality legislation.
Okay.
And that would be for OFM, DFM to look at under the Disability Discrimination Act, whether there need to be additional provisions around hire of vehicles, because it could apply to a minibus as much as to a taxi.
Yes.
So that would be for OFM, DFM to have a look at. If issues were, we get correspondence cases on occasion around this and reference the Equality Commission material and what the distinction that can be made versus the distinction that can't be made. It's that you need a larger vehicle for which they charge more. I take absolutely your point. That is because of the wheelchair you are in.
Yeah.
but the law doesn't make that loop at the moment, and it would be the DDA to make that loop.
Okay, that's fine. Fair enough. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
They're charging because they use a bigger vehicle rather than because of the
Yes.
disability. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, members, no more questions. Are you content if I put the question to you then? Are you content then for the department to proceed with making the taxi accessibility regulation NI 2050?
Yeah, great.
All content?
Great.
The ball's in
Right,
our court then, committee, to go and make all these things happen, and we will do our damnedest around that.
Chair, just to put
okay,
in...
so we're holding you to September 2015 for the single tier and meters and printers, all on board.
Okay, noted.
Okay.
Chair,
Peter,
I'm
yeah.
just going to make two sort of proposals right now. I mean, just to formally put the proposal in relation to the DRD, to write to the committee as regards the issue of the rear loading on,
Yes.
and highlight that this issue has been raised by Disability Action. I think also the other issue, it's not maybe immediate, but I think particularly between now and as we move towards that, it may be useful if we had representative of enforcement up, just to talk through just how things are going to operate on that side of it. I think, because obviously at times
In the
there's
future
been
to come.
concerns raised that you know, and we've had mixed views in terms of the levels of enforcement at times, put that way, on that side of things. I think, to be fair, comments probably better of late in that regard, but I think it'd be useful if we got that reassurance as well.
And I should have added, there is one more regulation around taxes to come through the SO1 stage, and that is around the fixed penalties, because the Act and the regulations are introducing a number of offences that we want to make fixed penalty offences to assist enforcement, and the levels of those, the £30 versus the £200 versus things in between. So there will need to be what we intend is a short, sharp consultation on those, because it's a fairly straightforward question, what should the level of offence be? It's not a philosophical question. So there will be that process running through the committee as well. Taxes hasn't quite gone away.
And that should come before September, though? We need
Well,
that
we're
before
intending
September.
that the consultation will issue in mid-May, will be for 4 weeks, and will close in mid-June, and the synopsis will be back before recess.
Okay.
Because we are conscious, if we go into recess, the
Yes.
committee can't play the role it should be playing in the development.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you then. Yep, thank you. Members, and thank you for your cooperation. We've done agreed on the 2SL ones. So, members, we now moved on then to item 5. We have an SR there on page 79. That's the ship recycling facilities regulation. The RU is to introduce a domestic legal framework implementing the requirements of Articles 13 and 14 of the EU ship recycling regulation. The committee considered the SL1 on the 16th of April, and we were content for the department to make the RU. The RU is subject to the negative resolution procedure and will come into operation in May 2015. The examiner of statutory rules has not yet commented on the RU. So if members are content, I'll put the following question to you. Members agreed that the Committee for the Environment has considered SR 2015/229, the ship recycling facilities regulations NI 2015, and subject to the report of the examiner of statutory rule, has no objection to the rule. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Then, members, next item is another SL1, that's the hazardous waste amendment regulation on page 18.9. The purpose of the rule is to amend the hazardous waste regulation 2005 to bring into effect changes introduced by the EU Commission. It will evoke the list of waste regulations and will replace all references to this with references to the EU decision. By doing so, the Department hopes to future-proof the hazardous waste regulations and avoid the need to amend the regulations every time the Commission updates the European list of waste. As this does not reflect any changes in policy, but rather reflects technical elements, the Department was not required to consult on the proposed changes. The RU is subject to the negative resolution procedure and is proposed to come into operation before the 1st of June 2015. Failure to introduce these requirements could result in an infraction by the EU. So are members content for the Department to proceed with making the rule?
Yep.
Content?
Yep.
Thank you. Next item is SL1, item 7, page 100, members. That's the draft local government exclusion of non-commercial consideration order. We're getting a departmental briefing, and that's from Mylene Ferguson, Julie Broadway and Tommy McCormick. So just to advise everyone that the briefing is being recorded by Hansard, and if Julie could, or Mylene could brief members then on the issue. Thank you.
This draft order is being made really to continue the policy which was in place before the coming into operation of the 2014 Local Government Act. It replicates and will re-establish the provisions of the 2012 Exclusion of Non-Commercial Considerations Order to enable councils to continue to include social clauses in their work and supply contracts. And if I can just briefly explain the background to the legislation, because I think it's a bit of convoluted, as usual, legislation. Article 19 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Northern Ireland Order 1992 makes provision in respect of the exclusion of non-commercial considerations in district council contracts. It prevents councils from introducing non-commercial considerations into their procurement processes for the award of public supply and works contracts by specifying a list of non-commercial matters. This was introduced in the context of the compulsory competitive tendering policies introduced in other jurisdictions. The Local Government Best Value Act 2002 made provision for councils to make arrangements for continuous improvement in the way in which a council's functions are exercised, and this contained an enabling power to permit the Department to make subordinate legislation to amend that list of non-commercial matters and to provide for a matter to cease to be a non-commercial matter. So the Department has made one statutory rule under that enabling power to specify that certain matters contained in Article 19 of the 1992 order should cease to be non-commercial matters, and those were the terms and conditions of employment by contractors of their workers, the composition and arrangements for promotion, transfer or training of their workforce, and the conduct of contractors or workers in industrial disputes. So the 2012 Exclusion of Non-Commercial Considerations Order was made at the request of councils, and it removed these restrictions to enable councils to include social clauses in their works and supply contracts. A public consultation on that 2012 order and regulations was carried out from the 7th of September to the 31st of October 2011, and the regulations were approved by the Assembly on the 3rd of July 2012. If we move on then to the making of the Local Government Act 2014, this made provision for a new performance management framework which replaced the Best Value regime, and the Best Value Act was repealed by the 2014 Local Government Act. The 2012 Exclusion of Non-Commercial Considerations Order was made under a power in the Best Value Act, and in general, if the provisions of a parent act are repealed, then any statutory rule made under that act would also fall. So that would mean then that the 2012 order would cease to have effect. However, the facility for councils to continue to include social clauses in their council contracts is still required, and the 2014 Act made the necessary enabling power to enable us to make a similar statutory rule to that of the 2012 Act. And that's what really these draft regulations do. They replicate and re-establish the provisions of the 2012 order to enable councils to continue to include social clauses. The draft order was not consulted on because it really is maintaining what was the previous legislation. And the draft order, by specifying that certain matters will cease to be non-commercial matters for the purposes of Article 19, will enable councils to consider the inclusion of social clauses in their contracts. For example, the provision of apprenticeships, the employment of people who are long-term unemployed, provision of work experience. Those are the type of social clauses that we know have already been written into contracts since the 2012 legislation came in. And happy to take any questions.
Certainly, I welcome the inclusion of social clauses in public services tendering. Very much encourage good practice and also helping employment and, as you say, apprenticeship schemes. It's really a tidying up job with this one, really, isn't it?
It's almost a technical amendment, to be honest, because it's just really putting back in place something which...
Something you put in and then you take... You took out and then you're now putting it back in.
And it's there's no change in the policy. It's the same provisions that were in the earlier.
Yeah, I don't have any questions for you now.
Just for
maybe any guidance on have we any guidance on social clauses?
We had issued guidance back in 2012, and we're actually working on amending that guidance so that it reflects the current 2015 order.
Yeah. Okay, Cal.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. And it is welcome in terms of the social clauses element. Just for clarification, I missed the wee bit about the Best Value Act.
Yes.
What can you clarify that point?
The Best Value Act has been repealed by the 2014 Act and replaced by the performance improvement provisions.
Sorry. Thank you.
But they are quite different, though. Best Value is about money, financial basis, and the continuous improvement is more on the practice of the whole organisation.
Yes, but it's just that's how everything was moving in other jurisdictions, really towards this performance improvement framework. And councils will still be able, through the performance improvement framework, to ensure that they're delivering value for money.
But why did you take out value for money? Does it mean now they don't have to consider value for money?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't mean that. It's just because things have moved on from the best value regime to this, performance improvement regime.
Okay. Members content? Okay, well, that's it. Didn't I tell you, Julie? That would be quick.
That was quick.
Earlier, I saw Julie.
It took longer to explain the background of the legislation.
Okay, thank you, members. Then, are you content then for the department to proceed with making the route? Content, thank you. Next item is chairperson's business, members. Just a number of issues. First thing is to remind everyone there will be no meeting next week due to the Assembly. Well, if you want to come now, you may be able to come on your own. Yes. So no meeting
next week.
for the committee next week. But the following week, we are going to Balmoral, members, on the 14th of May.
No meeting that weekend.
But just because previously we said we will have a formal meeting in the Mackey of the environment, Northern Ireland Environment Link. But we'll look at the map and talk to NIEL. It is going to be quite tight, and then also they have different stores in the Mackey. You can't stop people from walking around behind us. Even they said they can put like partition, but the noise issue could be, difficult for us to control. And if we have to broadcast it, you have people just, maybe talking loud. Or anyway, we will have people walking, milling around. So we thought we will go there as a visit, as an informal meeting. Yeah. But we'll be there. We'll have an informal meeting. NIEL wanted to present to us their land matters strategy, and that's by their land matters task force. So that would be good if they would present that to us, and the members can ask questions. And also there is also a possibility that there could be the refit presentation, but that's still to be confirmed. Whether the personnel will be available to do that. So we may have two presentations for us as an informal meeting, and then after that we'll walk around all the different stores and talk to the sector who are going to have their display, their exhibition there in the marquee. Although it's quite a big marquee, but we just think difficult with noise issue and the space issue that we can't have a formal meeting where we'll have to bring all our gears and everything there.
Okay.
Would that be good enough? Yeah.
Yeah, will this meeting be at the usual time of 10 a.m.?
Yes,
10
it will
a.m.
be, yes.
Usual time, yes.
To give you any indication what time you should leave home to get there for 10 a.m.? Would it be
Probably the day before.
6 in the morning? Or?
We're trying to work out if we can get a separate entrance so there won't be any queuing, but that's still, those details have still to be worked out. So I can send something round to members once things have been finalised, just about those kind of arrangements, the logistics of it.
Okay. You check helicopter flights and plane flights and
We'll get Thursday is the second day, is it, or first day?
Second day. is the
Second day, so
Second day.
yes, so maybe not so bad. But anyway, yeah, depending on the weather. If the weather's good, you have big queue going. But if we get a different queue, and we'll have a ticket spot in
Yes, in
advance,
advance,
so you
yes,
don't have to
yeah.
be buying tickets. So yeah. Just to warn members, also between now and 2 weeks' time,
Yes.
if we have any urgent matters to deal with, because we're missing next week and the following week for formal meetings, we may have to call a short meeting just to look at businesses. But members, if you recall, we have also said we would like to invite the environment sector to come and talk to us after their workshop with the Minister on funding.
That's right.
We thought that Tuesday the 12th of May, that if we have a meeting at about 12:30, so we'll meet the sector about their views on the proposal by the department on the next round of funding, and then if need be, we'll have a formal meeting then to look at businesses. So you need to put in your diary 12th of May.
Get an email.
We will meet with the group for at
Reminder,
least half an
I'll send a
hour for the
reminder
voluntary
around,
sector,
yes,
for the groups, the environment sector, at 12:30.
We
And
have that list.
if we need a formal meeting to look at businesses, then we'll make it a little bit longer, say from 12:30 to 1 or 2.
Chair, I know I'm
Can't
not
do it.
available that day.
Okay.
A personal commitment, but I'm just thinking, well, we don't have a full committee here. It might be worth even
We
emailing
send
out and
we
to
send
check availability
it.
to members.
No problem.
Yes. Because the department has issued criteria and for the funding application. We certainly want to hear their views on, how, on the process and the funding criteria, ASAP as well. Since we're not having a motion, I mean, Cahill, you talk about a motion.
We tried, Chair, you didn't. You weren't in agreement with that in there, so
Yeah.
there's no point.
But,
We'll let that one slide. We'll let
but maybe useful then to talk to the sector ASAP, as we said last time.
Chair, I would want to record my disappointment that we have not heard from the department by now.
No.
The Minister sat there and gave a categorical assurance that this matter was being treated as an urgent matter. It would be just, when I pushed him on it, asked him what he was talking about in days or weeks, he certainly said that it would be within an immediate, and here we are, we're not a bit far to fall.
No, none the wiser.
It was all done to
Yeah.
get just aware of the meeting. Very disappointing.
We wrote to the Minister last week.
Yeah.
And
No criticism
to
of
ask
your
for a meeting. Yeah.
Chair, we asked a fortnight
I know.
ago
Yeah.
for the
Yes.
Minister to come here to talk about it, and
I know.
there wasn't too many in agreement with it. And you're right, coming up to the election, we won't going to get anybody. So we're here to do the business as per usual. But and I'm sure Lord Marrow's comments in terms of disappointment, because over the last 2 weeks, all we've got is a statement to say there's more money available there.
Yes.
Now we're going to meet groups, whatever Tuesday that is. I'd like to now you've said to me that, we're going to talk about a process of applying for monies. These groups have been applying for monies for years. So you're asking about new criteria.
I know.
What's going on? I mean,
Yes.
has things substantially changed
that's
now
right.
that the
Yes.
criteria for applying for money for these groups who've been operating
Yes.
for years?
Yes. Yes.
But we need answers from the
No,
department.
you're right. It's not strategic thinking. It doesn't make sense to me. You're at the end of March writing to the organisations to say the Natural Heritage grant is finished, then saying now we have a new funding called the Natural Environment Fund that you can apply for, and there's £1 million. So it just does not make sense to me. The way it is dealt with. Why couldn't... And they had warning months before of the cuts, of severe cuts. Shouldn't they have thought properly how they should inform the groups, how the money should be spread out the whole year, rather than stopping one sort of grant and then starting another grant 3 months later? It's just a nonsense. And there's a very good article, members, I could share that around, in Scope, the magazine by Nick for criticising it, and I can share that around. Just not strategic thinking. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Members. Then I've done that. So yeah. So the next one is Matters Arising. Yeah. And then that's the report from Ciara on our committee visit. On the follow-up meeting with RAP councillors. It was very good, went really well. So that's just a report on it. The group heard that the funding for the RAP project will soon end. I think they're finishing in June. And there was a discussion regarding how best to keep the development of a circular economy on the agenda. The committee may want to maybe seek a formal meeting, a formal briefing from RAP later on in the year. Then, when they have finished their project and have their recommendations made, so we could maybe have a meeting with them then, around June or around then. So, members, you content to note the report and request a formal meeting with them?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Also, there's an invite from Renew to the workshop and Bookage event in May in Brussels to share experiences of collaboration to enhance innovation in the circular economy. They're interested in involving organisations who are planning to coordinate funding initiatives aimed at securing funding and commercial enterprises wishing to expand their resource recovery capabilities. Given the tight budget, members, I'm afraid I think we'll probably, would not want to go. If we go, it will be, of course, through our own budget. But I think, given the tight budget, I think it's difficult to justify, us going to Brussels. What do you think? I mean, anybody have very strong urge to go? Gal, you look like you might be interested.
Yeah, sure. That would have to do with scones and fruit on Thursday morning. No, it's grand, sure. I think it wouldn't be appropriate at this time.
No. Yeah. Okay, members content with that? Yeah. Then we'll write back to them. Then also refer members to the report of the examiner of statutory rules at page 7 of your tabled papers. The examiner has drawn our attention to breaches of the 21-day rule for 3 statutory rules relating to the transfer of powers to local government. And they are statutory rules 125, 182 and 183. The committee received briefings from the department on these rules, and our officials advised the committee that they would be in breach, as the regulations needed to be operational from 1st of April 2015. The examiner is content with the department's explanations. The examiner also wishes to draw our attention on drafting defects in the local government reorganisation. That's compensation for loss of employment regulations 2015 in respect of the inclusion of the civil service compensation scheme. the department has clarified its policy intent and will bring forward an amending regulation. Members, are you content to note?
Content.
Great.
Okay. Then next one is to refer you to correspondence from Chaos Voco at page 18 of your tabled papers. They request a briefing with the committee regarding a solar power development. The committee wrote to the department regarding issues raised by the group at our meeting on the 12th of March, and we still has not received a response. So their latest email is about, asking us, is there any response? So members, if we just send that email to the department for their response, and why we still haven't received any reply from them.
Yep.
Okay, and members, also really is difficult for us, I think, to look at individual applications. That's our policy. Really not to look at individual planning applications. Another one is, members, refer you to a response from the department to the OFM-DFM committee regarding its inquiry into building a united community. That's page 19 of your tabled papers. That's COE's response. They actually won an award on their design for sharing spaces policy. That's very good, isn't it? Okay, members, another this correspondence to refer you to. That's the minister's response at page 21 of your tabled papers, advising us of additional amendments required to be tabled at the consideration stage of the Road Traffic Amendment Bill. These are in addition to the amendments already considered and reported on by us. The need for the additional amendments came to light as a result of EU infraction proceedings against the UK under the third Driving Licence Directive. Members, I think we need to ask the officials to come and brief us on the new amendments.
Okay.
There are only 3 clauses, so okay, so that's, yes, members, just we want to mention matters arising. That's just to go back to matters arising, to continue. Just refer members to a response from the department at page 29 of your tabled papers regarding the European Commission's referral to the Court of Justice regarding non-compliance of an EC directive at Ballycastle wastewater treatment works. Members, the department has provided background to this issue, its contact with Northern Ireland Water and proposed remedial action, which includes an upgrade expected to start in April 2016 with completion by late 2017. The department has advised that the Commission may allow a period of grace of 5 years following initial court action within which the upgrade at Ballycastle would be completed. However, this would be at the discretion of the Commission, obviously. Members, would you wish to seek regular updates from the department in relation to this matter?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Was the department liable for any cost in relation to the court proceedings?
I'm not too sure. We can
we can ask. They're taking infraction fines against the UK. It wasn't just the Ballycastle treatment. There were a number. That was one of 10, is my understanding. So there may be, but we can clarify that with the department.
Okay.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we are on to consultations quickly, members. There's a consultation on the planning hazardous substance regulations at page 118. Members, is to amend the hazardous substance regulation to reflect changes in EU legislation on the classification of chemicals. Members, you content to request a synopsis of responses? Yep. Okay, and then another consultation on the recommendations made in the report by the Entertainment Licensing Review Group, and that's at page 33 of your tabled items. The consultation will run for 8 weeks, starting on the 1st of May. Members, are you content then to request synopsis?
Great.
Yep. Okay. And then next item 11, correspondence. You have the list of correspondence on page 169. Just members, have you any comments on any items, or are you content with the suggested actions on the cover note? Okay. Then members, the West Tyrone also refer you to emails from the West Tyrone against wind turbines at pages 216 and 220, notifying the committee that yesterday was the 20th anniversary of International Noise Day. Okay, members? Yep. And then you content if we send the emails to the department?
Great.
Okay.
Yes.
Then also there's a note from the Speaker's office at page 36 of tabled paper regarding a petition presented to the Assembly on Monday on a proposed development alongside the banks of the 6 Mile Water River. Just refer you to an email on this issue matter on page 37 of table papers regarding the impact of development along the 6 Mile Water from the 6 Mile Water Trust. Okay, members, are you content for us to forward this to the department for their comment? You know this river well, don't you, Lord Morrow?
I'm content to do that. I don't particularly know the river well, but what I do know well is that this particular river is a victim of continual, it's always in the news.
Pollution?
Pollution.
That's right.
And that's why I'm particularly interested in it, and what maybe perhaps the District Anglican Association or clubs are saying. And I think that we should keep this one very much under our radar.
Yes.
Because it seems to be that every year there's a report about a massive fish kill on the 6 Mile Water, which I think is very, very disappointing.
I know there are some on-the-ground partnership between DOE and local anglers on monitoring wildlife on the river. And we went there, the committee went there a couple of years ago, and we saw the anglers kind of getting water out and checking the species. And so, yep, I'd agree with you, Sonny. We forward this and maybe ask Sonny. We'll see what the response is. We certainly would want to monitor this on a regular basis.
And Chair, would it be appropriate to say in our response that the committee have a particular interest in the 6 Mile Water River, as we have noted that it is continually in the news for the wrong reasons, namely extensive pollution?
Yes. Yeah. And the committee had actually walked along the bank of the 6 Mile Water at one stage. Yeah.
Chair, maybe.
Were you not there, Lord Morrow, that time when the committee went there? Maybe you were not.
I don't think it was.
Yeah.
This is one I'd have been particularly interested.
Chair, maybe we could ask for the number of incidents that has occurred over this last, say, 2 or 3 years or whatever.
Yeah.
5 years, well, go ahead,
Sure.
5 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it has been on the news, like Lord Morrow said.
Yeah.
All right.
There was serious damages to fish and wildlife. Yeah. Okay, and then members' forward work programme as on page 225. Members refer you to the Clerk's memo and Department forward work programme for us. The Clerk's memo suggests oral briefings that the committee may wish to schedule with the department before the summer recess. These include briefings on subordinate legislation, consultations and other items. This is not an exhaustive list, and where particular issues arise, other briefings may be scheduled at the committee's request. The committee may wish to reflect on the oral briefings it wishes to receive on consultations after considering the synopsis of responses. Members, I have suggested a few more, and I've lost the screen now. I've suggested a few more requests for oral briefings. What time are we? We still have time. Members, you want to go through that? That's at page 225. Let's go through. That's the at page 226. First one is primary legislation. That's the environmental better regulations that's coming to us fairly soon. The taxis regulations.
What's that?
So if you want to go through to see if there's anything else you may want for oral briefing.
Just read them out, Chair.
Well,
Yeah.
we have them in front of you.
Systems crashed, yeah.
Do you want me to read
Them
them?
with systems crashed, Chair, yeah. What, read them out, whatever.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'll just go through it quickly then. So just under subordinate legislation, there are some that we've already received oral briefings on. For example, today we had the taximeter devices. There are some subordinate legislation subject to the negative resolution. So we've already considered the environmental liability prevention amendment regulations. And we have received the hazardous waste amendment regulations to the SL1, so I'm not suggesting oral briefings on any of those. I'm suggesting that you might wish to request oral briefings on the planned amount of fixed penalty regulation in Northern Ireland.
Thank you.
There's one in relation to taxi orders. I know Ian had mentioned it earlier, so we could request an oral briefing on it. The local government performance indicator and standards order, and the guidance on local government performance improvements, so I was suggesting oral briefings on those. Consultation on amendments to regulations 3 to 5 and schedule 1 to the waste management licensing regulations. I know the committee has an interest in waste management, so I was suggesting an oral briefing on it. There is guidance on community planning. And there is the 2015-16 DOE business plan and agency business plans, and the usual outturn the June monitoring round and an update on programme for government. And there's also a suggested briefing on the report on the programme for NIEA prosperity agreements, progress and performance, and an annual update on strategic waste infrastructure programme. So that's what it's the recommendation to have oral briefings on those. There are others there, but if any,
No, that's fine, yeah.
I know,
Fine, yeah.
Chair, you had.
Yeah. I wonder, should we also ask for oral briefing on policy on dilapidated or dangerous structures and neglected sites? I know members were concerned about those previously.
Yeah, I think that is something.
I think we should ask them to come and talk to us. So they are going to have a consultation on it and going to bring us the synopsis of the responses in June. So I think we should ask for a briefing. Yeah.
From historical monuments.
I don't understand why my
Well, Chair, we need to be mindful now. We've only got after next week. Well, what, 6 weeks?
There's not that many.
I mean,
No.
whatever, I'd prioritise obviously whatever legislation there has to be.
yes, oh, absolutely.
just
yeah.
go with that
Yeah.
and mean
yeah.
that'd be-
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Marry them along with the legislation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I think I'm happy with the rest.
You've lost it.
I know for some reason when I highlight things previously, they don't come up again. When I when I switch it off, they all go. They don't stay on the screen.
It's a very good system when it works.
Okay, members, that's grand. And then just then, then also, members, then we have our own forward work programme on page 238. Okay, are you content to note, and as we progress, we'll add things onto it? Okay, AOB, nothing? No? So just to remind members then, we have no meeting next week, but our following meeting is the 12th of May, informal meeting, and the 14th, and to Balmoral, and then the formal meeting is on Tuesday, the 21st of May here. Okay, members, thank you very much for your attendance and staying until 12. Very good. Thank you.